Okay, I think we'll make a start. Welcome, everyone. Good day to everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. My name, for those of you that don't know me, is Dr. Gary Smith, and I'm the president of the Faculty of Homeopathy here in the UK. And it's wonderful to see everyone that's joined us today, both here in the UK and from many different countries around the world. So thank you very much for joining us. This event's being recorded, just so that you're aware of that, and the recording will be made available then afterwards. And indeed, all the previous recordings of previous events are all available if you're interested in those. So if you're watching us live today, welcome. And if you're going to be watching us later on, then thank you for tuning in. This is the first webinar of a new series of 5 webinars during this year that continues on the tradition of the last couple of years, representing this collaboration between the Faculty of Homeopathy and VithoulkasCompass. And I'd like to say again how pleased I am to be collaborating in this way and providing these sessions and these excellent cases. And thank you to our friends at VithoulkasCompass for their support of the Faculty of Homeopathy. As you know, our speaker throughout this series and for each of the webinars during this new series this year is our good friend Andrew Ward, who's very well known to us. Andrew is the UK ambassador for VithoulkasCompass and is a very busy practitioner, both in the for a long time. And if you could just mute, if everyone could just mute their microphones. Thank you. Excellent. Keep. You can unmute a little bit later on, but not quite just yet. Please do unmute and ask questions later, but keep muted for now, please. Yeah, Andrew's very experienced, very busy educator and practitioner over many years, working in both the public and private sectors, and has been involved in homeopathic education and homeopathic practice over the years. His subject matter today, his case for today, is a case of what sounds like a very interesting case of narcolepsy, which was successfully treated with homeopathic treatment with follow-up over a 2-year period. I haven't seen the case, but it sounds like a very interesting subject. And Andrew will be demonstrating how a correctly chosen homeopathic medicine can bring about really profound healing effects. And in particular, how using the VithoulkasCompass software can be helpful in choosing that, both the initial prescription and indeed the follow-up analysis and the follow-up prescribing. So I'm looking forward to the presentation. I hope that you find it interesting. In contrast to the subject matter of the case, I'm sure we'll all be wide awake and find this riveting. So I'm looking forward, Andrew. All your cases are always absolutely fascinating, actually, and all worthy of publication in a top journal. And I'm quite sure this will be no different. Please, everyone, add your questions to the chat box as we go through, and we'll put those questions to Andrew after the presentation's over. And I think at that point, I'll withdraw and hand over to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Once again for your support and your marvelous introduction. I would like to reiterate the thanks for the support of VithoulkasCompass and the Faculty of Homeopathy for this wonderful collaboration. I would like to talk to you today. This is an old case of mine from 2002. So it's some time ago, but I have a good 2-year follow-up on this case, and actually also saw this patient some years later because he was local, and sort of gathered more information, possibly 7 or 8 years later, and he was still well. So this is always very useful. Sometimes we don't always get long-term information from patients. We might see them for a few months, and they say they're better, and then we lose track of them. They don't. They disappear. You know, they move. They don't need us anymore, or they've moved on. So this is good to have long-term follow-ups to show the real effects of classical homeopathy. Now let me just stop this share. And let me see. I will now share another screen. Not mailboxes. Where is it? Must be this one. Okay. I'm hoping you can all see this screen. I just wanted to start off with a discussion about the condition. Narcolepsy is relatively well-known condition, but little understood still, and not easily treated. So definitions of narcolepsy is that it's classified as a neurological disorder. So it's a very serious condition. It's not just a sleep disorder. It has a neurological element, but it affects the sleep cycle, the natural ability to wake and sleep. So people with narcolepsy have excessive, uncontrollable daytime sleepiness and may suddenly fall asleep at any time during any type of activity. There are two types, which I'll go into in a minute. In a typical sleep cycle, we enter the early stages of sleep, then the deeper stages, and finally, after 90 minutes, the REM sleep. People with narcolepsy go into REM sleep almost immediately in the sleep cycle, and sometimes whilst they are awake. So it's very disturbing. Type 1 narcolepsy comes with sudden loss of muscle tone that causes weakness and makes you unable to control your muscles, cataplexy. Type 2 is narcolepsy without the cataplexy. In many cases, narcolepsy isn't diagnosed and therefore treated, and this was actually true of this case. Symptoms: in REM sleep, we can dream and have muscle paralysis, which explains some of the symptoms, which include excessive daytime sleepiness, EDS. Lack of energy can make it hard to concentrate, memory lapses, depression, exhaustion. Cataplexy, so sudden, slurred speech to total body collapse, often triggered by intense emotions such as surprise, laughter, or anger. Then there can be hallucinations, especially in the type 1. These delusions can happen at any time and are often vivid and frightening. They often, if they happen when you're falling asleep, they're called hypnagogic hallucinations. If they happen when you're waking up, they're called hypnopompic hallucinations. Not a word I knew. Hypnopompic. Sleep paralysis. You may be unable to move or speak whilst falling asleep or waking up, sometimes for a few seconds or several minutes. And then general disruption of sleep. So this is how narcolepsy is categorized. In this case, this gentleman came to see me in 2002, 52 years old. And his initial presentation, he had never had a diagnosis. It was myself that diagnosed it, and then he had it confirmed. But he'd been having these problems, as I'll describe, since he was 7 years old. And he described it as such: speech often doesn't come out right, he said, difficult to find the right words. He feels that his mouth will sometimes stretch almost like a grimace, distorting his speech so it's a bit slurred. His profession, he was a self-employed carpenter doing house restorations. So very, very busy man, and very skilled. He would experience dizziness as if he was still moving when sitting, room as if swaying. He'd always had a lot of mood swings, feeling very elated and then feeling very depressed, and then able to get very aggressive verbally. He was married with children. Desire to sleep in the daytime can be overwhelming. For instance, can fall asleep when on a job or sitting down. Forgetful and absent-minded, using the wrong words, getting mixed up. Hard to find the right words. He described, I remember, his work. For instance, he'd be doing a repetitive job. This would be something like painting. And then after a few minutes, he would start to go into a trance, and then just, as he say, he would just crash down. And then he'd be asleep, which would be embarrassing for him. A couple of times he'd been fired from his job because the house owners had come home and found him asleep, as we say, asleep on the job, thinking he was just having a nap. And so they sacked him. And he really didn't understand what was happening to himself. These things would happen suddenly. Also can have nightmares, particularly of falling, fears of the dark, narrow places and shadows, a tendency to misjudge distances, concentration, very difficult, especially if there's a lot of noise. As a result of this, and this is something I've seen in a few cases of narcolepsy, is that there can be a converse hypervigilance. Because these people are aware of their conditions, of the fact that they may fall asleep suddenly, for instance, driving, which is obviously a very dangerous situation, they have to stimulate themselves artificially to keep going. So he would describe how he would have to drive very fast in order to keep awake in the car. And take risks, on corners and things, just to keep the adrenaline higher. So this hypervigilance and noticing everything in the room, so you would become almost hypersensitive to everything. I remember once he came to my clinic in the beginning and told me, when he came to he'd been down in the waiting room and he'd noticed that one of the light bulbs in the waiting room in the ceiling was flickering. And he told the receptionist, that's about to blow. He said, you need to be careful, that's going in the next few hours. And the sort of thing that most people wouldn't notice. I said episodes of collapse. This is, he felt he would just collapse down, feeling like I have to crawl. It's like I crash and cannot move. And then he'll get stuck, either falling asleep or he'll get stuck in a situation where he can't move. So he's awake, but he can't move. This is the cataplexy. So it would happen sometimes when he was working, or he described once to me, he was in the bath and he got stuck in the bath. He couldn't move and he couldn't speak, and he was just there for a couple of hours. And it wasn't until somebody banged on the door to see where he was that he suddenly came out of it. So this kind of thing happens in narcolepsy as well. Cataplexy. He's a workaholic. He describes he works 7 days a week. It can take 40 minutes to get out of bed in the morning. For instance, so he has the paralysis sometimes. He wakes, he can't move. And sometimes he'll get stuck in a chair and not be able to move out of it. And it takes something big or a shock to be able to act. Some of his history was that he'd been married for 20 years with children. He learned carpentry and they went to work in the factory, and now was self-employed. 5 years earlier, he had been divorced from a previous marriage, and also his mother had committed suicide. So this was in the family history. Now, in terms of, as I always talk about the levels of health, we have to try and ascertain which level of health this patient is in. And the question we ask is always about high fever. Here we have quite a chronic neurological disorder. And as we would expect, in such a case, there would be a lack of fever. And this was the case. He described no acute illnesses for years and years, or fever, at least 10, 15 years. Since childhood, could not achieve things. He felt that he'd been hindered by this problem, but just didn't understand what it was, and nobody took it seriously. He couldn't achieve things because of this situation, so got very depressed about it. He found it hard to remember many things that he'd just heard or seen. Difficult to plan things, gets very easily distracted. Speech will start to speed up and he'll get quicker and quicker, and then the words don't come easily, or they seem like he's drunk. Likes to be efficient, perfectionist at things, but this condition prevents it. So he has to make a tremendous extra effort to do his job very well. Gets angry at others, efficiency and slowness. Sometimes answering slowly, and sometimes a loss of words while speaking. Now, this was something, I actually have this case on video, but of course I unfortunately can't show it here. I have taught with it before, and it's actually a beautiful example of this that I captured, of this particular symptom. And I'll try and imitate it to you as if I'm suffering with this condition. So they'll be talking to you and saying, well, my history is like this, and they'll start to get a bit distracted and say, well, when I was 8 years old, and my parents, and it's a lot of hesitation, you see, and my parents, and they took me to the fair, and and they're talking about the history, and suddenly he starts to slow down and says, well, and then we went, That's gone. This is exactly how you'll see them presenting. You see, they'll be talking quite a lot and then slows down as they're starting to feel tired, and then what was I saying? It's like the thoughts just go like clouds, they disappear. They can't remember what they're saying. This is what you'll see. Also snoring at night, and can sometimes have breathing stopping at night. Can get thoughts in the head, irrational or silly thoughts. Also likes to play jokes and pranks on people. So this was another thing I noticed. In my reception, we used to keep the receptionists very entertained, as he was always making jokes and playing tricks with them. And I remember once he said he came into my reception room, I think the first time, and he had a ticket from something else, and he went up to the reception. He said, "Oh, I've come to pick up my laundry," and the receptionist had no idea what to do because he was making a joke that he had an appointment, and he wanted to just see the reaction. He would play games like this. So also, he described having to be one step ahead because of this situation where things may just crash. He had to preempt everything in order to be ahead of things, to have quicker reactions mentally. But also surprises would be not good for him. He didn't like to have surprises. He liked to preconceive everything, prepare for every situation. He used to have fish in a big fish tanks, and he described once where one of the fish, he came down in the morning and it was lying on its back, floating around, whizzing around the tank, and this completely threw him for days because he hadn't preempted this idea that there might be something wrong with his fish, and it completely threw his thought processes. So, now, with this case, as I say, this case goes back to 2002 when I wasn't using computerized homeopathic software. So this is something that I've entered subsequently. And so I will show you, I've put the date when I first saw him. And I will show you the analysis, the symptoms that I put in. That he mentioned. So absent-mindedness, absent-minded periodical attacks, short-lasting periodical attacks of absent-mindedness, abusiveness, acuteness, quick perception, difficult concentration, inaccurate judge of distances, fastidious, fear of the dark, all the things we mentioned, industrious, very hardworking, jesting, likes to make jokes, many mistakes in speaking, using wrong words, changeable moods, wandering speech. This is the symptom that I was just mentioning to you, vanishing of thoughts whilst speaking. And I've put in here unconsciousness after excitement, sudden thick speech, dreams. I can't, let me move this bar here. Overpowering sleepiness, which is one of the main symptoms for narcolepsy. So these are the rubrics I used. And what I'll show you is everything that I gave him. So the initial prescription I made for him actually was with some of these symptoms. He seemed to me, because at this point I didn't really understand this condition when I first saw him, what was going on here. I prescribed Nux Vomica, 1M, for this very driven and workaholic man. And what happened after the Nux Vomica, he developed a pain between his scapula and pain shooting to the head and around the side of the abdomen. And he described this as an old symptom from 15 years ago. And then he had a sore throat for 3 weeks, but no fever. So this is an interesting reaction here. We need to be clear about what kind of reaction this is with remedy reactions. What we're assuming is that this patient is in group 3 of the levels of health. This is where you have chronic disease developed and no fever, no high fever for many years. Now, the reactions in group 3 are quite specific. He produced a reaction and a mild acute for 1 week after the remedy. Now, in group 3, this is a good sign, because generally in group 3, they don't get acutes, you see. So if you get any sign, even a mild acute coming, you know this is a good thing. As they do not produce acutes, as the chronic disorder is established at a deep level. However, in order to move up the levels, the organism needs to produce a high fever, 38.5 plus. This acute was not strong enough to do this. So we just you let it go, no treatment, and it subsided by itself. This development indicates that a further stimulation of the defense mechanism is needed in order to counteract the chronic condition and produce such an acute. For instance, in groups 1 and 2, this kind of reaction would be incorrect 1 week after the remedy. So he described that he felt a bit more cheerful after the remedy, had 1 episode of waking and not being able to move, got stuck. And this he hadn't really experienced like this. So this was like a sleep paralysis, the cataplexy in the morning or waking. So we can take this as rather a new symptom or enhanced symptom. And then falling asleep anytime, anywhere. This was very strong now. It was happening all the time. And loss of thoughts whilst speaking. So what does this tell us really about this prescription? It tells us that this is what I like to term an intelligent prescription. It's not the simillimum we had, but what Hahnemann described in, you can read it, look this up, Organon 178 to 182. 178 to 182. He describes this action perfectly, where he states that when you don't have perhaps a clear case, or the practitioner hasn't seen it clearly enough, you're prescribing partially on a partial case, and so the remedy touches the case partially, somewhat, causes a reaction, quite a good reaction, but it's not enough to really stimulate the organism towards cure. Patient feels somewhat better, but the main complaint is the same. And then what we have in this scenario is a new symptom. He describes this, Hahnemann, a new symptom belonging actually to the patient, but either not seen before, not experienced, or it's becomes more noticeable after your prescription. And these symptoms that come up, symptoms belong to the correct remedy that you need to give. So this is a phenomenon that happens a lot if you're aware of it, and saves us quite a lot when we give wrong prescriptions or partial prescriptions. So on repertorizing it, let's see. We see the noxomica here, had many symptoms. 13. However, this new symptom of this sudden falling asleep and this sleep paralysis brought up a very interesting remedy, nux muscata. Now, nux muscata is a spice called nutmeg, which is a known narcotic substance. And on investigation of this, this is what put me then towards perhaps this man has narcolepsy. It's one of our main remedies for narcolepsy. I've used it 2 or 3 times successfully. So I started to understand then that this man had this pathology, and then told him this is what I thought he had. And then he had it confirmed by a specialist, having previously never had it mentioned to him by any doctor. So with nux muscata, we see thoughts vanishing while speaking, you see here. Cannabis indica, which we would expect, glycosis, but nux is the 3rd degree remedy. Through whilst speaking, you see they talk and then it's gone. And this is classic nux muscata. As if in a dream, overpowering sleepiness. See, this is the main rubric for narcolepsy. So we have quite a few remedies, the main ones being nux muscata and opium. Opium also I've used. They will fall asleep just talking to you in the consultation and start snoring. This is opium. And another one that is mentioned here, but it should be probably in higher degree, is allium cepa, onion. These 3 remedies, I would say, are the main 3 with narcolepsy that I have seen. Allium cepa. Absent-minded, short, periodical attacks, using wrong words, speech wandering, etc. Sudden unconsciousness. You see? Dreams of falling even, that he mentioned, and grimacing. And also this symptom, jesting. See, nux muscata, they like to joke. It's narcotic, it makes people very lively, very jolly, jesting. So it seemed like a beautiful case of nux muscata. Let's have a look at the material. And compass, you can go straight to Lux Muscata. Here we have George Vithoulkas's notes, which are unique to VithoulkasCompass. Buraka, Clark, Kent, Allen, and remedy and relationships. And you can add your own notes here as well. So we see dullness, confusion, sleepiness, as if in a dream, clairvoyance, all the symptoms really, very forgetful, vanishing of thoughts whilst reading, speaking, periodic attacks. Also, he didn't have this, but they have this tremendous dryness of the mucous membranes physically. Overpowering sleepiness, narcolepsy. And one of the remedies has this disposition to faint if they see blood, like alumina. And constipation. So yes, this is a good. So Lux Muscata 1N is what I prescribed. What happened after this was quite extraordinary, really. After the remedy had an aggravation of an old complaint, which was like a bronchitis, for a few days. Lots of mucus on the chest, cough, inflammation, and high fever. So you see, after the simillimum, he developed a high fever. This only took a few days. The acute came with high fever. You see, with the exact remedy, it pushes the case up into what we can assume here is that actually he was in level 7. That's the upper part of group 3, where he had a mild acute. And then the correct remedy pushed him into group 2, 6, 5, 4, where he produces high fever. And the acute was much stronger. This indicates our remedy is correct. Very good sign in this group. You have to leave the acute if you can in this situation. If you can, you mustn't treat it unless the patient is in serious danger of, with an infection or pain, or then, of course, we try to look for a clear acute remedy. Then we're allowed to give it. If it's clear, we can give it. If not, we mustn't spoil the case by giving random remedies, because the patient will then relapse. So, if possible, let them go through it. So this tells us he was at a level 7, and that the chronic pathology is not quite as deep as we suspected, and that we can expect a cure eventually. So the longer the period of time between taking the remedy and the appearance of the first acute, the lower the organism is in group 3, the longer time it takes for the acute to appear. It may take a year for an acute to appear after careful treatment, say at level 9, lower part of group 3. After careful treatment, 1 year later, they may produce the acute. So we have to be patient with these cases. It's not always instant. So he came back and described feeling more energetic, not experienced any falling asleep episodes at work, only 1 sleep paralysis, still took a very long time to have his breakfast, 2 hours, forgot his change in a shop when he bought something, still mucus on the chest coming up. And then he described something very interesting. For me, he started to get flashbacks, mental, visual flashbacks in his head from his childhood. Remember, this condition, he believed, started when he was 7 years old. So the flashbacks were, they used to live on a farm, a beautiful farm, idyllic life, he said. Farm animals, tractors. For a child, it's absolute heaven. It was always sunny, he said, and he even remembered being in his pram. He had flashbacks of lying in his pram and hearing the bees buzzing around in the summer. Lovely, huh? And he saw something, there's something there dangling, moving, and the bees. It's a very nice memory. But one of the flashbacks was that they had to move from the farm suddenly. They had to sell up everything. And this was when he was 10 years old. And he remembers seeing all his familiar things, the farm animals being sent away, all the equipment, everything being sold off in an auction. And he didn't know, it wasn't explained to him what was happening. So it was a big trauma for him, really. He had to move from the farm and move to a caravan. So from a beautiful farm into a caravan. They went bankrupt. They were forced to sell everything in 60 days. Everything was sold, all their possessions, everything went in a day. He felt his whole world was dismantled. And then they moved to a small semi-detached house with no animals. So these sorts of memories started coming up that he hadn't remembered, he hadn't thought about. A feeling of anger came up with it, realized it was perhaps why I like to control and preempt everything, and that there are no surprises in my life, he said. All memories are clearer since the remedy. So at this point, this is very good. This is subconscious things coming up that probably were causative for his condition. So I said, wait, and then if he feels like he's relapsing, then to take Nux muscata 10M. So he came back a month later and said he'd taken it 3 times in the month. He'd had relapses and then better relapses. This time, no aggravations to speak of. No falling asleep in the daytime. Questioning his relationship, suddenly he felt like he'd woken up, he'd been in a dream for years, much more coherent, more efficient, and more incentivized to do things. So we wait. He had 3 attacks in the month, took the remedy again, and then a few months later, only had to use it once in the last 5 weeks. Working very hard. Occasional feeling of like he's drunk and thought patterns scattered, memory not so good. Narcolepsy much, much better. So we waited. And then when I saw him next, a couple of months later, he said, I feel that my thoughts can run out of control. Cannot help to think ahead. Crisis management. Fears, high places, tunnels, elevators, looking up at tall buildings. Imagines disasters and what would I do in case it's going to happen? What happens if there is a guy behind me with a knife? How would I deal with it? On the way to the bank, for instance. Maybe there'll be a robbery. I can imagine the whole scene. So here we now have a new picture emerging after the Nux muscata, where he's brought up all these memories and these things have all been put to rest. And this was, by this point, actually, this was now the July 2004 we've got to here. This is 2 years later. 2 years on, he gets his second remedy, which is Argentum nitricum, 10M. And then I saw him in the September. He had an aggravation of his back pain again, old symptom, aggravation of a hiatus hernia, an acid reflux for 2 days, an old symptom. Heights seem better now, very well in himself, working hard, no narcolepsy at all. So by this point, he had no more attacks of narcolepsy, 2 years on. He'd left his relationship and moved into his own place, feeling much better. So just to summarize this, he starts in group 3, about level 7. That means no acutes or mild acutes or fever for years, and pathology is quite deep on the neurological level. But the first remedy, Nux, he has an aggravation of an old symptom 15 years ago for 1 week, has a mild acute with no fever, feels better. Has a new symptom of cataplectic attack. The falling asleep, the same, main complaint. Case retaken, new remedy chosen, Nux muscata, based on the new symptoms. He then had an aggravation of the chest and mucus and cough and a bronchitis with high fever, 1 week. Better in the narcolepsy. The condition started to improve after this. Means that he jumped to group 2. Third remedy given then for the runaway ideas and the fears and imagination. He gets an aggravation for 1 night, an indigestion for 2 nights. This suggests aggravation for 1 day, 2 days, that he's gone right up into probably level 4. Generally better mentally with no narcolepsy. And as I said, I bumped into him many years later at a school fair and asked him how he was, and he gave me the thumbs up. He said he'd never experienced any more narcoleptic attacks. So was doing very well. So what I wanted to show you here is some more things where I wanted to find some more symptoms with Nux muscata. There are many, but these are some of them that you'll find in the repertory. Absent-minded stands in one place and never accomplishes what he undertakes. It's very interesting. It's exactly describes the kind of attacks that he was getting. Desire for amusement. You see, this is exactly how he was. He would amuse himself, like with my receptionists. He would play tricks with them and say, "Here's my, I've come to pick up my laundry, please." It was amusing to him. Inaccurate judge of distances, the fears that he had, forgetful, jesting, confused, wandering speech, thoughts, sleepiness. You see, this is another symptom of narcolepsy, is if they get angry or laughter suddenly, they can fall asleep. It's like a collapse. Or if you've seen narcoleptics, someone tells a joke and everyone, they laugh, they fall down asleep. It's like a cutting out. So we see unconsciousness from emotions. This is narcoleptic symptom. And grimaces. And of course you can, as I've shown you before, you can search very nicely in VithoulkasCompass, say, let's put in mind. So we put in here Nux muscata and the mind chapter, and it will bring up all the symptoms in order of intensity. And you'll see here it causes this type of abstraction of mind, clairvoyance, difficult concentration, etc. So here you can find many symptoms you may never have thought were there. Blissful feeling. So that's one way you can have a look for this. Another possibility thing to show you the results page. Open, yes, is specific remedy analysis. And here you can look, this will help you during the consultation, for instance, to find and ask questions. So if you're saying, oh, I want to
Andrew, we can't hear you.
Can't hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, so you choose the remedies you want to differentiate and the chapter here, mind, and then proceed. And what this will give you are the main differential symptoms between the two remedies you've chosen, Nux moscata and the lachesis. So here we have some differential. If you're not sure, you might say, ask about snakes. Are they jealous? These, of course, lachesis, and then dullness thinking could be both remedies. So we see lachesis and Nux moscata there, you see. So we're using these symptoms to try and you say, do you lose your thoughts on reading? And the patient says, yes. Then it's both of them. So we have to be careful trying to differentiate. Can you look at blood? No. It's Nux moscata, you see. So this is just to help your memory with some quick questions. And then down here in main keynote symptoms, here you see you can ask specific questions about each remedy. Lachesis questions. Nux moscata questions. You see? Very, very helpful. Speeds things up. And then case specific. These are specific rubrics that are very close to the ones that we used. So these may be actually confirmed by the patient, you see. Forgetful of everything that occurred for 6 years. Lachesis. Very strange. Automatic, speech loud. So all these things help us to find the remedy, very useful tools within VithoulkasCompass. So, yes. There, I think I'll leave it. I hope that's been of interest to you. And if you have any questions, I think we can now go to the Elena I can answer some questions.
Yes, well, first of all, Andrew, thank you again for your outstanding work and for yet again another extremely interesting case. It really is always a pleasure to attend your webinars and the lessons we learn here. And I would also like to thank Gary for hosting this webinar once again. It is a great honor for us. And I would also like to say that together with the Faculty of Homeopathy, we would like to thank all the attendees for taking their time to join us today. So, having said that, I am passing on to the questions, which, Andrew, are the following. The first question is, just give me 1 second. How old was he when his mother committed suicide?
I knew someone might ask that, and I don't have the information here, but it wasn't when he was a child, it was later. I remember that, but I don't have the exact age. Yeah.
Okay. Then there's another question from Emma Stanton, and it's more regarding the program. And she asks why you didn't merge some of the symptoms that are very similar.
Yes, you can do that. That can then reduce, if you like, reduce the number of symptoms down. But yeah, and I could have used less symptoms, I guess, but actually it doesn't. The brilliance, the beauty of VithoulkasCompass is that it doesn't really matter. As long as you have the essential information in there, the remedy will come up very clearly, without question. So if we had done that, I think the result's the same. The idea, of course, of all repertories is just to give us a pointer, a clue towards which remedies we need to consider in a case, to differentiate, not to tell us the answer, but to say maybe it's this one or this one, and then to look at materia medica to understand. But yes, it's possible.
Okay, so now on to the next question, and it's from P. Gupta, who asks, how did we reach the 1M potency, and why not use another potency or LM potency?
Yeah, good question. I at that point I wasn't using LM potencies, so that answers that one. But you could. 1M. I used 1M because I thought that the remedy picture was clear. So the criteria for potency for me is how clear the remedy is, despite, and also his case wasn't as low in the levels as I had suspected. So you can go higher with this case, if your clarity of remedy, and it's also how can you say, a deeper case, neurological mental case. So you can go higher in these cases.
Okay. So now another question from Andras, who asks if it's acceptable to give 1M to a patient in a group C. He says, I've done this before on an occasion, but I thought it would be a bit too high.
Yes, usually it is too high, especially in the lower C, 8 and 9. It's better to keep the potency a bit lower, like 200 maximum we think of in group C3. But in his case, because he was in upper and had a mild acute, I could have used 200. But what I thought 1M would be safe for him. Yeah.
Okay. Then there's a participant called Revathy, and asks, why was Argentum G given?
Argentum nitricum.
Yes.
Why was
Sorry,
it given?
Argentum nitricum given.
Because that picture emerged much more clearly after the first remedy. So once it had done its job and the narcolepsy was gone, he started to produce a clearer picture of Argentum nitricum. Some of those symptoms were already there in the beginning, but they were obscured. We have to give the first remedy, and you take that away, and the next one comes up clearly. And then you get a beautiful reaction. If you'd given it, there was a question there about what if you gave it first? You wouldn't have anything happening. Nothing would happen.
Okay. So then there's another question from Atul Jaggi, who says, did the patient get a high fever again, which you needed to treat in the period of 2 years?
After the first one?
Yes.
No, there wasn't another fever after that initial one. No.
Okay. So then there's Ellen Friedman, who asks, why wouldn't you repeat Nook's M for 1M before giving the 10M?
Yes, good. I knew that would be asked as well. You could. The answer is you could repeat it, and probably you should, but I went for a 10M. I wanted to push the case a bit faster. Also, he'd taken the 1M a few times himself, actually. So, he had repeated it himself. So I think once you've repeated it a few times, you need to go up.
Okay. So now there's another question from Nancy Weiss, who asks, do you have experience of treating narcolepsy in people who have been on medication for it several years?
No, all the cases I've treated, it's not so many, it's not something we see a lot, but none of them were on medications. So I imagine that would be quite difficult to see the remedy more clearly, because it'll be obscuring the stage, you see. Mainly they're put on stimulants, aren't they? Stimulant drugs to keep them awake, which then, of course, you don't see the state. You just see them all like hyped up. So yeah, you'd have to ideally stop the drugs, wait, and then prescribe.
Okay. Now there's another question from P. Gupta, who asks, how would you deal with the case if symptoms would have aggravated, say by giving first medicine? Would you need to change the power or the medicine itself? And basically, how can you take clues from the software as how to react?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Yeah, I'll say it again. I'll read it exactly as it's written. He says, how to deal with the case if symptoms would have aggravated, say by giving first medicine. Need to change power or medicine itself. How to take clue from software. What I think he's asking is basically how do you get clues from the software in order to know how to proceed? If the symptoms would have been aggravated. In the quality check, I presume, huh?
Yeah, I think, aggravations we would expect in that group. He did have a bit of an aggravation. And yes, when we record in VithoulkasCompass, there is a mechanism, isn't there, to see when we finish the case, and then we open another follow-up. We say, was there an aggravation?
Yeah.
That's all recorded there.
Okay.
In the follow-up, basically.
So now we have another question, which is from Bia Panterot, who asks, why didn't you start off with Argentum Nit 1M to begin with?
Yes. Yeah, I think I answered that just now. I said if you did that.
You did. Yeah, you did. Yeah, sorry, you did. Now from Marcia Nims, she asks, if you'd used LM, what potency would you have started with? Well, you didn't use LM at the time, so you can't answer that.
Start with 1, I suppose.
Yeah, okay. Demer Kiran asked, this is the last question I see on the chat. is what is the cause for Nook's M layer?
The cause. Well, I believe that the flashbacks really showed him what the causation was. You know, psychologically, I've seen this in a few cases of narcolepsy. They all had a big trauma in their cases, and often it happened in childhood or teens, a big trauma. And this trauma gets forgotten, completely forgotten. And then the trauma, the change, the thing that happens is too much for the system, and it starts cutting out. Whenever there's a stress or something coming, it cuts out and they fall asleep. So falling asleep is like a defense mechanism from the memories. And in all the cases, particularly this was the most startling, after the Nuxmascata, the remedy, all the memories started to float up. It showed what he'd been storing inside all the time as the causation, the trauma, the grief, basically, of such a terrible thing happening to a child, you know.
Yeah.
So this was very interesting to me. And then the condition doesn't need to be there anymore. It's gone. It doesn't need the defense anymore.
Okay, Andrew. Well, that's it for questions. Thank you again very much. And I pass the floor to Gary, to Dr. Smith, who will close this webinar as usual.
Thank you very much, Eilina. And thank you, Andrew, for another excellent case, a really tremendous case that I hope is published sometime if it hasn't been already. That's a really great case. And yeah, I was just thinking, you know, of the really strong and harsh medications, conventional medications that this patient, you know, probably would have ended up with, actually, you know, had he not sought homeopathic treatment, first of all, which is remarkable, really. To think of all the side effects that have been saved and think of the cost benefits, the health benefits to the person. Yeah, amazing, actually. Dramatic. Anyway, thank you, Andrew, for that. That was very, very good. And thank you, everyone, for coming to this webinar. I want to just say a note for your diary. The next installment in this series will be this day, 4 weeks' time. So you can mark that in your diary, 23rd of April. Sunday, the 23rd of April, same time, same place, is the next part of this series. So we look forward to seeing you again then. And in the meantime, if you are a statutorily regulated healthcare professional practicing homeopathy, regulated in your area of practice, you can be a member of the Faculty of Homeopathy. A lot of people think the Faculty of Homeopathy is for UK people only. Our headquarters are in London, but actually we have members in 32 different countries around the world, including the UK, 32 different countries. So, so we've got a truly global membership. So if you're practicing homeopathy and you're regulated, you can be a member. And if you're not, you can still contact us and we can still have an affiliation. If you want to know what's what within the homeopathic research world, you should subscribe to the Homeopathy Journal, which is the Faculty of Homeopathy Scientific Research Journal, the only Medline listed journal in the world that is dedicated to homeopathy. And in addition to that, the faculty have a quarterly membership magazine, Simile, which you may have heard of, which has been going for over 50 years, which is a great and very popular production. And lots of other membership benefits. Please do drop us a line at info@facultyofhomeopathy.org if you are interested. We'd love to have a discussion with you. So it just remains for me to thank you all again. As I say, put the note in your diary to come back again the 23rd of April. Thank you to Andrew for a great case, and thank you to Eilina. Oh yes, thank you for the final slide. You can contact Eilina at that email address if you'd like a free trial of VithoulkasCompass with a 20% discount. And if you're a Faculty of Homeopathy member, you can get a 25% discount from a subscription to VithoulkasCompass. Is there any more slides? I think that's the final one. Yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm happy now to close the webinar unless Eileen has any final comments, and we look forward to seeing you again. Emails will go out. It'll be promoted in the usual channels, so keep your eyes peeled. But the heads up from me is that's the date, and put that in your diary, and we'll see you again then, hopefully. So thank you, everyone, once again for attending.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.